Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome. Thank you very much for joining us. We welcome in Aaron Swade and Benzine Cohn, Nachman Chapler, Saba, Irving Fishbaum, Eddie Chazan, Mark Frankel, Dr. Block, Mo Kushner, Yitzi Fuchs, Dr. Guy, Stephen Holtzman, Shalom Fogel, Ruvain Pollack, Shimon Klein, Shelley Zeitlin, Michal, Marshall Castle, Rabbi Kranz, Yisrael Fisher, Yitzi Muller, Ilya Schutman, Abe Arbach, Naftali Jablin, Barish Gesseman, here in the shul. It's good to have Michal Avram back, and Chaim Krainer, and Rich Lenner, Baruch Ian, Ruvain Shanet, David Helfgott on Kol Loshin. We are learning Le'ilu Nishmas Yaakov Zev ben Yehuda Aryeh, Rivka bas Yaakov Yosef, Tzivya Miriam bas Gad, Yosef ben Tzion ben Yaakov Zev, Yaakov Chaim ben Abba. So it's Esther bas Yona. Yeah, we kept on saying Esther bas Gittel, but it's Esther bas Yona is the father's name. Right? Esther bas Yona, Avram ben Shmuel HaKayin, Yaakov Yumansky for Akursa Tov for the Rav, and the Zoom family, and Nachas from children and grandchildren, A.B. Spry with Nachas from children and grandchildren, Ed Salah and Joshua Rosenberg. Rabbi Kranz, how's your wife doing?
Baruch Hashem, she's okay.
Okay, Chaya Rezel Bas Yocheved, correct?
Yes.
She should have a complete recovery.
Amen.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
My wife is going for a test for her. She got a cancer on her face. They have to take it off.
What's the name?
Esther Bas Havagolda.
Esther Bas Havagolda. She should only need them to do one layer, and she should be fine.
Amen.
Okay, so last night, towards the end of the daf, I translated something wrong. 3 lines from the bottom of Kuf Mem Aleph from the base. Remember, we're still trying to figure out if you cannot be, try to mute everybody here. If you cannot be mezakeh to an uber, then how could the Mishnah say that the father said that if I have a boy, the boy should get $100? If you can't give it to the fetus, so how could he make such a statement? So the Gemara says, V'lei malei b'sheyolda. And here what it means is, let's say it's talking about where the woman already gave birth. So then you'll say, so then what does it mean if she has a boy? Because he wasn't in the hospital. So he doesn't know what it is. Right? But she already gave birth. So then it's no problem of an uber. It's not an uber anymore. But the Gemara says, Ihachi, if so, that doesn't fit into the end of the Mishnah. The Ketani Sefer, because at the end of the Mishnah it says, Omar kol masha teiled ishti. Whatever my wife has, yito, harizeh yito, then whatever it is the child gets. So it shouldn't say when my wife gives birth. It should say kol she'teiled. Should it say whatever she has? Kol she'yolda mebayileh. Whatever she had. So that's obviously not pshat. So what is pshat? So now as we start the top of Kuf Mem Beis Amud Aleph, v'lei malei d'amar likisheteiled. This is the way I learned the previous. But maybe he said that I'm giving, if it's a boy, then I give 100 when it's born. Likisheteiled. Says the Gemara, well, the reason why Rav Huna doesn't learn the Mishnah that way is because Rav Huna l'tamei, Rav Huna goes according to his reasoning, the Amar Rav Huna af likisheteiled loikana. If something now is not in the world, you cannot say that it should get it even when it comes in the world later, because it goes according to at the time that you make the statement. Now this is a machloikis. Damar Rav Nachman hamazaka le'uber. If one grants something to a fetus, loikana. If he grants it now, the fetus doesn't acquire it. Likish tailored, but if he says when it will be born, kana. But Rav Huna says since right now it's not in the world, you can't even make a future statement. Rav Huna Amar af likish tailored loikana. Rav Sheshes has the most lenient opinion. Rav Sheshes says, Echad zeh ve'echad zeh kana. You could even give it to the fetus now. You could even be mezakeh to the uber now. Rav Sheshes says, Mina aminallah. What's my proof that you could even give it to the fetus now? The Tanya, ger shemes. A ger dies. Now, we know that Marshall has his shortwave radio always tuned in to see if there's a ger that dies, because he's looking for a quick million. A ger that dies without any relatives, and he steps in and acquires it, he gets everything. Right? So he's always looking for a dead ger. Right? I never saw somebody who has in the newspapers, right? Please alert me to dead gers. So what happened was ger shemes, a ger. He used to be Tony, but he became Matisyo. Matisyo died, so Marshall got into his speedy helicopter and ran and was zeicha in everything. Ubizbezu Yisrael nechasav, and he went ahead and he acquired all his property. Vishamu sheyesh lo ben. And then we heard, to Marshall's great chagrin, that he had a son. Right? If he had a son, there goes the millions. Or shahoisa ishtay muberes. His wife was pregnant. So the Gemara says, Marshall has to return everything. Chayavim lahazir. Then get a load what happens. Chigziru akol, Marshall returned everything, even the diamond brooch that he assessed at $88,000. He returned everything because Marshall ultimately is a fair man, so he returned everything. The achakach shamash shemeis b'nai. Then he hears that the son died. Or that the wife miscarried. So, what happens? Eddie jumps and takes the brooch. So, hirzik b'shniya kana. The one that's marzik it the second time acquires it. Uberishayna like kana. But the one that got it the first time is not kaina. Because when Marshall took it, the son was alive, so his taking was nothing. Now that Eddie took it after the son died, so Eddie gets it. But wait a second. If it was a pregnant woman and she miscarried, and an uber can't be zeichen it, so then when Marshall took it, it was up for grabs. Why should Eddie get it? V'isal kadaitach oberloikani lamalu achzuke b'shniya. Why do you have to take hold of it a second time? Ha'achzikalu chadazimna. When Marshall took it, it actually was up for grabs because the pregnant woman miscarried. So the uber was never zeichen it. So therefore, Marshall's kinyan should be good, and Eddie shouldn't get it. So Amar Abaya says, yes, in that case, you're right. In that case, the fetus of the ger will acquire it. But that's because over there, nobody has to transfer it to the fetus. It's an automatic Yerusha. Yerusha haba me'eleh shani. Since it's something that's automatic, that could go even to a fetus. Rava Amar, Rava says, you're right. The fetus didn't acquire it. So if the fetus didn't acquire it, so why doesn't Marshall get it? So here the Gemara says a very interesting reason. Rava says a very interesting reason. Rava says a kinyan that's made that's not with full confidence is not a good kinyan. Since Marshall knew the wife was pregnant, and Roiv Nashim is Abrois V'Yoldois, most women give birth to a healthy child, Marshall didn't know that his kinyan is going to be effective. To the contrary, it probably won't be effective because the child will be born and then everything will go to the child. A kinyan which you're not confident in, Rava says doesn't acquire. Rava Mashani Hasam de Rafi Marpian Biyadaya Meikar. Because the kinyan was not a certain kinyan. Says the Gemara, my beinayu, what's the difference between the two? Ike beinayu sheshamu boy shemeis, v'loy meis. What happened is that Marshall heard that the fetus died. But it didn't die. And then afterwards it did die. So if the reason is that he wasn't confident with the kinyan, he was confident with the kinyan because he heard that it died. If the reason is because Uber is kana, so since it didn't die, when Marshall made the kinyan, it's no good because the Uber acquired it because Yerusha Abba Me'eleha, the fetus acquires. And then later on, it died. So the kinyan that Marshall made while the fetus was alive is not a good kinyan. Eddie that got it, he's the one that acquires it. Now, Tajma. Tinik ben yoim echad, noichel umanchel. A child that's 1 day old inherits and transmits to someone else. Now, an example of this would be where a woman, let's say Billa has a child done. And Dunn lives for 1 day and then dies. His mother died. He inherits his mother. He lived for 1 day and then died. But once he lived for 1 day, he inherited it to transfer it to his paternal brothers. So he could transfer it to Reuven, Shimon, and Levi, who are his paternal brothers. Now, if he didn't inherit it, then it wouldn't go to Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. It would go to Bila's Yoshim. So the Gemara says, Tinik ben yoim echad noichel umanchel, inherits and transmits. So this seems to be clear that ben yoim echad in, only if it lives a day, uberloi. Says the Gemara, so you see that a fetus is not Zaycha. Says the Gemara, Hama Rav Sheshis. Rav Sheshis explains it because of a different reason. Noichel b'nichsei ha'em, when the child inherits, the day-old child inherits, he inherits the property of the mother, lahanchel la'achim in of, to transmit it to his paternal brothers. But v'dafka ben yoim echad, aval uberloi. But let's say Billa dies in childbirth together with the child doesn't inherit it to pass it to his paternal brothers. Why? Not because an uber can't acquire. Because Rav Sheshes is of the opinion that if a mother dies in childbirth, the child dies before the mother. The child dies first. My timer, says the Gemara, as we turn to Amud Beis, says the Gemara, Dehu my inspiration, because the child dies first when the mother dies in childbirth, and therefore he never got to be Yerushet because he died before the mother. Ve'ena ben Yerushet imay bekever, the child won't inherit his mother when it's in the grave, to go to the paternal brothers, rather it goes to the mother's relatives. Says the Gemara, is that the Metzias? That when a woman dies in childbirth, her fetus dies first? Lememra dehu mayis bereisha, the fetus dies first. V'hava uvda, there was an incident that the mother died in childbirth. Upirkes tlasa pirkuse, and the child thrashed 3 times. Isn't that a raya that the child was still alive after the death of the mother? So the Gemara says, no, that's just rigor mortis. Sometimes a dead item will sometimes involuntarily thrash around. The tail of a lizard. You could cut the tail of a lizard off from the body, and even after it's cut off, it thrashes. So you see that that's no proof that it was still alive.
What about Binyamin?
What about Binyamin?
Binyamin.
Yeah.
His mother died. He was born.
Okay, so there we're talking about, first of all, how do you know that they didn't remove Binyamin before she died?
We were talking about dying in childbirth,
Right, so that's probably what happened over there. Now, Marberei de Rav Yosef Mishmei de Rava Amar, Mar, the son of Rav Yosef in the name of Rava, says, Loimer Shememayit B'chelik B'chayra, that a child that's born will limit the portion of the Bechar. Meaning that if, let's say, there's Ruvain, Shimon, and Levi is born and dies after 1 day. If Levi is born and dies after 1 day, so then we view it as if there's 4 portions. Reuven gets 2 portions, then Shimon, and then Levi. But the only time that he diminishes the chelik of the Bechar is Dafka ben Yom Echad. That's only if he lived 1 day. Aval Uberloi, the fact that she had a fetus, that doesn't make the double portion smaller. My timer, what's the reason? Because it says in the Parsha of Bechar, V'yolduloi, and the child was born. V'yolduloi Amarachman. Dama Ma'abrei Rav Yosef Mishmei de Rava. This is a very interesting chiddush. Let's say there were twins born posthumously after the death of the father. There were 2 boys. The first one that comes out, like Esav, is the Bechar. Does he get a double portion? So you would say, why not? He's the firstborn. Says the Gemara, no. Very interesting chiddush. Dama Ma'abrei Rav Yosef Mishmei de Rava, Ben shenoyled la'achar misas aviv. If a child is born, in this case twins, after the death of the father, einay memayit b'chelik b'chayr. No, this first says that there were already other children, and a son was born posthumous to the father. That son, although it will get a portion in the Yerusha, he doesn't limit the firstborn portion. So let's say there was Reuven and Shimon. Reuven was the Bechor, and Shimon. And then Levi was born posthumously after the death of the father. When we calculate the chelik of the Bechor, we only calculate it as 3 portions. 2 portions for Reuven, 1 portion for Shimon. Then afterwards, we're going to give from what's left a portion to Levi. But he doesn't diminish the firstborn right. My timer, what's the reason? V'yolda loy amarachmana. It's born to him. V'aleka. This is the way they taught it in Surah. B'Surah masnuhachi. For Pumpadisa masnuhachi. And this was the chiddush that I just told you, that there's no chelik bechar by a bechar that's born posthumous after the death of the father. Amar Ma'abrei Rav Yosef Mishmei de Rava, bechar shenoiled la'achar misas aviv. What happened was, Rachmana litzlan, he was a soldier that was killed in battle, and then his wife had twins after his death. The older twin doesn't get a chelik of bechar. Ein a noitel pishnayim. He doesn't get a double portion. My time, what's the reason? Yakir Amar Rachmana. It says that he recognizes his older son. V'halesa Yakir. He's not alive to recognize. And says the Gemara, this is the halacha. V'ilchasa kachol hani lishnei the Amar Ma'abrei Rav Yosef Mishmei de Rava. That's the halacha. Now let's get back to the question of whether you could be mezaka to an uber. Amar Rab Yitzchak, Amar Rab Yochanan, hamazaka l'uber loikana. If you give to an uber, the uber does not acquire. I said, and what about our whole Mishnah? Our Mishnah says the father said, if my wife has a boy, he should get $100. If he has a girl, he should get $200. That seems to be that you could give to an uber. The im timer Mishnah saynu. Now the Gemara introduces a new svara. Although normally you can't give to a fetus, but if the fetus is your own child, because you're close to your own child, you could even give to a fetus. Therefore, since a man is close to his son, he could transfer even to a fetus. Amalei Shmuel Rav Chana Bagdasa. Shmuel said to Rav Chana. By the way, you see that Chana is also a male name. There's Chana and there's Chana with an aleph. Chana is a male name. So, Amalei Shmuel Rav Chana Bagdasa. Another example, there's certain names that are swing names. We just said tonight, we said the name Yaina. Yaina is a girl's name and then a boy's name. Another example is Simcha. There are girls that are named Simcha and there are boys that are named Simcha. There's certain names that are they're used for both male and female. So, Amalei Shmuel Rav Chana Bagdasa. Poik Aisi Libei Asara, come and bring 10 people. We learned, by the way, this out, that if you want to publicize a halacha, you bring 10 people. We learned this out from Bayez. When Bayez wanted to publicize that Ma'avi v'loy Ma'avis, that a Ma'avis woman, a female, is permitted, and therefore Rusa Ma'avia is permitted, he gathered 10 people. So he said, gather for me 10 people, Aisili Be'asara, Ve'emoloch Ba'apayu, and I could say in their presence, Hamazaka Lo'oberkana, that you could give something to a fetus, but however, that's not the halacha. Ve'ilchasa Hamazaka Lo'oberloikana. You can't give to a fetus. It has to come out to the world, except in the event that it's your own child. To your own child, you could give it like in our Stam Mishnah. Now, here we have a very, very interesting case. Hahud Amal de Biseyu, he had a second wife. So he says to his second wife, Nichsei lebanai, my property should go to your children. To your children, that he's marrying her, and she's afraid what's going to be with her family. So he says, my property should go to your children, dahavili minach, which I have from you. Now he had a son from his first wife. Now, obviously the son was worried that he was getting disinherited. Asa Brei Keshisha, his older son from his first wife came, Amaleyahu Gavra Mai Ta'avialei. What's going to be with me? So Amalei, so he said to him, Zil Knei Kechad Mibra. No, you should get like one of the children of my new wife. So now the Gemara takes this apart. The bequest that he made, that her children should get his estate, that's not good. That's worthless. Because even if you hold Amazaka Uber, but it's your own child, it gets it, but that's if it was an Uber. Here, the children weren't even conceived yet. So the statement that he made about her children, they don't get anything. What he said to the older son, you should have a portion like one of my new sons, that the question is, did he give something extra to his older son? Hanach vadi loikanu. The new children, they don't get anything from this bequest. Da'akate lesnu. They're not even conceived yet. Hi. Now here, when he dies, all the boys from all the wives get an inheritance. The question is, does this older son get an extra portion because he said you should have like my new children? Or do we say that it's meaningless because since what he said my new children was worthless because they weren't even conceived yet, and he said you should have like them, it's also nothing. So this is a machlokes. Hi is kulik l'talia b'makom banya. Does the older child get an extra portion with the other children? Or less like kulik l'talia b'makom banya. Or maybe he doesn't get an extra portion. So the Gemara says it's a machlokes. Rabbi Avin and Rabbi Maisha, Rabbi Yirmiyah, Rabbi Avin and Rabbi Maisha and Rabbi Yirmiyah say the Imrei is kulik l'talia b'makom banya. He does get an extra portion. Because he was in the world. Rabbi Avov, Rabbi Chanina bar Papi, Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha, Demrei les chulik l'talia b'makom banya. He doesn't get an extra portion because he said you should get like that of my new wife. And since that of his new wife doesn't get anything because they weren't even conceived yet, he doesn't get anything either. So Amalei Rabbi Avol, Rabbi Avol said to Rabbi Yirmiyah, Hilchas kavasan or Hilchas kavasaychu? Is the law like us or is the law like you? Amalei, so he said, Pshita de Hilchas kavasan. It's obvious the law is like us, the kashishna minaychu. Because we're older than you, we're senior than you. Valav Hilchas kavasaychu, the law is not like you. The dar de keyatum, your relative children. We're the senior rabbis. Amalei, so he said to him, Midei b'kashishu talia milsa. Does this have to do with age? B'taima talia milsa. It has to do with whose svara is better. And which svara is better? I know Baruch is going to have a hard time sleeping. It's a cliffhanger. I know. Maybe you should stay here because you won't get any sleep. You go away, When it's Motzei Shabbos, you won't be able to hold, hang in there. But we'll talk about the Svaras and Yirtzeh Hashem Motzei Shabbos at 7:30. Now, the Mishnah Yomis we did already, and now we're going to do the For the Shabbos table.